In February 1991, Malaysian Prime Minister Dr. Mahathir Mohamad unveiled his vision to turn Malaysia into a fully developed nation by 2020. The idea, which came to be known as Wawasan 2020 or Vision 2020, listed 9 strategic challenges the country had to overcome to reach the goal of a united, progressive and prosperous nation.
The 9 points under 2020 had helped the government to industrialize. When we started off in 1957, the GDP was not even worthy of mentioning in modern days, but now you have got around, let's say, $9,900 as per capita income.
It was refreshing to read such liberating words like the United Malaysian Nation, common and shared destiny, and one Bangsa Malaysia in Wawasan 2020, and the 9 strategic challenges.
But today, almost 30 years after Dr. Mahathir first mooted the idea, Malaysia is still falling behind its 2020 vision quest.
This is not a complete failure. It's just we didn't make, and we fell about 5 years to make that developed status.
Why has Malaysia failed to achieve its much-touted 2020 vision? What will it take for this resource-rich nation to reach this lofty goal?
That was the question asked by the first one. Vision 2020 was not achieved because for the last 15 years, the wrong strategy and policy were followed by the previous government, 2 governments. They did not focus on achieving Vision 2020, that is to say that Malaysia should become, by the year 2020, a developed country in our own definition. But because they haven't done that, now we cannot say by next year we would achieve Vision 2020. But in order that we progress so that eventually we would become a developed country, we are now introducing a new vision called shared prosperity. And this vision will be better than the Vision 2020 because everyone will enjoy prosperity.
Dr. Mahathir has set a record of the longest serving Malaysian Prime Minister with 22 years in office. Certainly, he should be expected to do more and to achieve a success far higher than his predecessors. Observers and researchers and even scholars could not explain Mahathir's achievement through comparison with his predecessors, since he had surpassed all of them and further developed his unique credentials. Since the early 1990s, his credentials have already developed into a specific ideological perspective called Mahathirism. Professor Ku Butik, in his book Paradoxes of Mahathirism, an intellectual biography of Mahathir Mohamad, wrote, "In 1995, I introduced the term Mahathirism as conceptual shorthand for Mahathir's ideology. Itself a composite of his core ideas of nationalism, capitalism, Islam, populism, and authoritarianism. Mahathirism was not only considered as a simple idea of a leader on power, but an ideology developed through years of leadership, as Ku further mentioned. Mahathirism framed a worldview which was more than Mahathir's alone, and was shared by the social classes and groups closely aligned with his aspiration for Malaysia. Mahathirism as an ideology was initially based on his thorough observation of the Malaysians lives, particularly the Malays during the 60s and 70s. It developed into a political belief molded by the socialization process of his life experience, turned him into a disciplinarian with the qualities of a shrewd businessman and a visionary leader. Professor Ahmad Fauzi, 1992, in his study on Dr. Mahathir, explained three different aspects of Mahathirism. They were related to his public policies, political strategy, and leadership style. He wrote, "The term Mahathirism is used in three different contexts. The first refers to Dr. Mahathir's public policies, which were designed to invoke a strong state and a government that would be competent to bring about a new era. Secondly, it refers to his political strategy in maneuvering the government and the party. Finally, it refers to his leadership style in managing the party as well as the government, which differed from his predecessors. The term Mahathirism, however, was generally taken negatively to denote the whole package of an autocratic and oppressive leadership style, which Mahathir complained. The foreign press seems to imply authoritarian government with Mahathirism. In reality, he would never like to attach any idea with his name. Imagine that he would never assume every grandeur achievement of the country belongs solely to him and called to be named after him. How can anyone assume that he would be pleased to have his name attached to an autocratic and oppressive leadership style?"
Bahawa falsafah pembangunan ekonomi dan politik Mahathirism sudah tidak boleh pakai lagi. Sudah berakhir. Konsep Mahathirism dalam sistem ekonomi dan pembangunan negara, saya menyeru kepada generasi muda, rakan-rakan Pakatan Harapan supaya berfikir semula. Berfikir semula bahawa Mahathirism yang 50 tahun dominan politik negara cuba untuk meneruskan legasinya sudah tidak terpakai lagi. Kita perlu ubah persepsi masyarakat dalam mengatur dan menguruskan negara ini. Persepsinya sudah berbeza dan belum terlambat untuk rakan-rakan saya. Saya percaya Sungai Petani faham apabila saya kata Mahathirism.
Throughout his premiership, Dr. Mahathir was seen as approaching every idea differently, inconsistently, and sometimes paradoxically. Professor Jomo K. Sunram, 2003, once observed, Mahathir's policies were inconsistent and several of his major policy turns were in fact U-turns, made in response to crises, some of which were created by him, albeit unwittingly. This unconventional way of dealing with ideas, issues and problems often puzzle observers, researchers and scholars to assess Mahathir's leadership. Those of his supporters certainly will praise him. The oppositions and the critics, on the other hand, will certainly criticize his inconsistencies. Professor Jomo, however, tend to view otherwise. It would be fairer to say that Mahathir leaves behind him a checkered record of bold experiments, false starts, partial successes, and narrow escape. But as we have explored Dr. Mahathir's leadership experience from the perspective of a problem base in this book, why don't we let his achievements speak by themselves? We should value varieties of his approaches as exceptional based on the nature of the problems that he faced. The unique diagnostic approaches and the appropriateness of the solving techniques that he used. After all, he is not only a medical doctor who cured the people's illness, but also using his skill to cure the social, economic and political problems, as Dr. Ong 2005 wrote. Throughout his political career, Dr. Mahathir behaved as the ever-diligent medical doctor, constantly studying the symptoms to diagnose the cause of the ills in his community and country before proceeding to prescribe the correct treatment to restore good health. After his retirement in 2003, Dr. Mahathir was appointed to some advisory posts, including advisor to companies like Petronas and Proton. He continued to serve the country actively through these posts. Unlike his predecessors, who used to be known as passive advisors, he did not only wait for the company's management to come to him, but participate actively in discussions on various issues related to the company and the interests of the nation, and voice out his views on them. For instance, he was against the policy of the government to give more APs for importing foreign cars, as it would damage the national car project of Proton. He voiced out his views and criticized the government policy. It was truly a genuine style of Dr. Mahathir, a straightforward person who did not care much about what people would say about him. When he criticized, he meant every word he said or wrote. However, he will not simply criticize if nothing is wrong. When he criticized the wrongdoings, he did not care who the culprits are. For him, wrong is wrong, whoever the culprits are. He used to criticize many world leaders of their war crimes, misconducts, and unfair treatments of other people and countries. As a citizen of this country, he has every right to voice out his views on leaders of the country when they did the wrong things. He fully used his rights to say every wrong things about both of his successors, Abdullah Badawi and Najib Razak. However, he never forced them or the people to accept whatever he said. But Dr. Mahathir is not an ordinary citizen. He is an elder statesman and was a prime minister whose experience surpassed every other prime minister of the country. His views must be highly valuable, regarded and respected by many. When he said something about his successors, people should take it seriously. Therefore, when he criticized Abdullah and Najib, his criticism are considered as over and above ordinary people. Luckily, on many occasions, his criticism proved to be factual and beneficial for the country and the people. Many might blame him for the wrong-footed direction shown by the country's leadership under Abdullah and Najib, but it was his criticism that realigned the direction and enabled the country to escape from becoming a failed state. Our following discussion will explore further this situation, which began soon after Dr. Mahathir's retirement in 2003. After the first year in office, Tun Abdullah Ahmad Badawi had shown an outstanding achievement by winning the 2004 general election. Dr. Mahathir was very happy since this result validated his decision to choose Abdullah as his successor. He was highly anticipated that Abdullah will continue the nation's Vision 2020 and uphold the leadership integrity to achieve better accomplishment for the country. To his frustration, Abdullah had done many of the opposites. One after another major project approved during Dr. Mahathir's administration were cancelled during the project, including the project for building the new bridge to replace the old Johor Causeway connecting Malaysia and Singapore. It was the most unwelcome decision for Dr. Mahathir, not only because of the cancellation of the project, but more importantly because Abdullah had shown his leadership indignity by submitting to Singapore's desires. For him, Abdullah had undermined the country's sovereignty by submitting to Singapore. He said, "When the project involving the bridge to Singapore was cancelled, I was flabbergasted. By allowing Singaporeans to dictate terms, the current administration had effectively undermined the sovereignty of our country. I had a choice. I could remain tight-lipped and maintain my image of a respected elder statesman, or I could make myself heard again. I chose the latter. It was too much for me to see us submitting to Singapore."
Now, you stepped down from the leadership in 2003, and at that time you fell out with the man you'd handpicked for the job, Dr. Abdullah Ahmad Badawi. And I wonder, where did most of your differences lie? What was the problem?
Well, initially there was no fallout at all. I was ready to support him, but the moment I stepped down, I was barred from seeing the ministers. I was not allowed to speak to party members. invitations to me to speak to various audience were asked to be withdrawn. I was isolated and I was regarded almost like a pariah.
Why do you think that was? Especially
I just can't understand. I know he wants to show that he is a different man, that he has his own ideas, and he's not going to be dominated by my ideas. He wants to get rid of Mahathirism, if you like.
Since then, Dr. Mahathir keeps his voice heard. At first, his voice was widely spread through the mainstream media. But when his criticism had shaken Abdullah's administration, the government started to control the media and efforts were made to silence his voice. Thanks to the emergence of the new media, the social media and the web blogs booming, this old man was unaffected by the censorship. His problems-based thinking had made him easily adapted to the new advancement in media technology. He started to use a blog to unblock the censorship, and his voice was loudly heard through this new media. Some critics mock him as suffering the post-prime ministerial syndrome. He ignored them and continued to criticize Abdullah's leadership, especially his weak leadership, flip-flop decisions and short-sighted views. Abdullah Badawi's leadership later proved to be one of the main factors that led to the serious setback for the ruling party in the 2008 general election. The ruling coalition failed to win a two-thirds majority. 5 states were lost to the opposition. It was the most shocking result and also the main reason that forced Dr. Mahathir to put more pressure on Abdullah to resign. After some efforts stumbled to the wall, he chose to resign from UMNO membership in May 2008. It was his last-ditch measure to send the message to UMNO members so that they would do something to save the party. The message seemed to be loud and clear. Abdullah finally announced his willingness to step down and give way to Najib Razak to take over UMNO's presidency and Malaysia's 6th Prime Minister. The decision pleased Dr. Mahathir and he returned to UMNO in 2009, but he questioned, is this enough to save UMNO and the Barisan Nasional? What is clear is that we need a strong leader to guide us out of this quagmire, and unless radical measures are taken, the Barisan Nasional will not survive the next general election. Dr. Mahathir had seen UMNO, after his leadership, was going deep into trouble. It had lost its democratic values. Leaders were exploiting democracy to stay in power, along with money politics and the misguided notion of the Malay superiority status. UMNO becomes weaker and vulnerable to the destruction from within. However, he continued to stay in UMNO as he could not find any other political organization that worthy of his political views and vision. For many years into his retirement, he could not see how a single multiracial party such as DAP or PKR could be the best option for the Malaysians. Single racial-based parties like UMNO, MCA or MIC are still highly desirable since Malaysia is a country developed deeply based on ethnocentric. For him, only when the Malays are confident that they can compete with the Chinese economically and the Chinese cease to emphasize their Chinese origins and their difference from others, will there be genuine multi-racial politics. His decision to criticize Abdullah Badawi's leadership was only a first step towards the more crucial mission. It was the beginning of his second phase of a political comeback. He felt dutiful to observe, monitor and criticize Najib Razak's leadership misdirection. He had no leadership position to attract the people, but he used strong conviction and arguments to lead them towards saving the country from becoming a failed state. Taking the cause of the people and nation as his focus point, he used Chedet weblog to share his views on many emerging issues related to Najib Razak's leadership. Dr. Mahathir has set a record of the longest-serving Prime Minister with 22 years in office. Certainly, he should be expected to do more and to achieve success far higher than his predecessors. Observers and researchers and even scholars could not explain Dr. Mahathir's achievement through comparison with his predecessors, as in he had surpassed all of them and further developed his unique credentials.